It is now my sincere pleasure to welcome to the stage Catherine Purcell, who is president of St. Joseph's Academy right here in Cleveland, who will introduce our opening keynote speaker, Dr. Carol Gilligan, who will be in conversation with Sarah Odell from the Hewitt School, and also Denise Labiniak from Windsor School. Catherine.
Good afternoon. As a lifelong Clevelander, it is my pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon. I'm Catherine Purcell, the president at St. Joseph Academy, a girls' high school on the near west side of Cleveland. In the fall of 1987, I entered Laurel School as a new ninth grader. I was truly excited to begin my own girls' school experience. Sometime that fall, I found myself in a small room being interviewed about my experiences and perspectives as an adolescent girl. Not until a few years later did I understand that there was a longitudinal research project happening at Laurel. Run by Dr. Carol Gilligan and Ms. Lynn Michael Brown, it resulted in the book Meeting at the Crossroads, which discusses girls' development and how it affects the psychology of women. As a senior at Laurel, I was class president and involved in organizing a retreat with Dr. Gilligan and Ms. Brown. They spent an entire day with our class talking about the research study, the book, highlighting its importance as a path-setting piece of research. The girls who were profiled in the book were my classmates, and it was fascinating for us to learn about the purpose and the process of the study. They explained that teenage girls as a group had not historically been studied, and that researchers had assumed that girls would follow along the same path to development as boys. Dr. Gilligan addressed that void and began studying girls and teenage girls at girls' schools, including Laurel School and Emma Willard School. As I sat in my first psychology class the next year in college, we discussed Dr. Carol Gilligan and her work. I was so proud to be well-versed in Dr. Gilligan's research, its focus, and its importance for women and for girls. After college, I was fortunate to join the faculty at Laurel School. With the history of the Gilligan study as part of Laurel's fabric, Ann Klotz, the current head, formed Laurel School's Center for Research on Girls and asked Dr. Gilligan to serve on the advisory committee. With the leadership of Ann Klotz and LCRG's executive director, Dr. Lisa DeMoore, and guidance from Dr. Gilligan, Laurel took on another research study with Dana Hall School, 21st Century Athenas, aligning achievement and well-being. At the conclusion of that study, Dr. Gilligan returned to Laurel to speak at Laurel's Center for Research on Girls Symposium about the impact of her research on women's studies. It was an amazing experience for those of us who were involved in the study back in the late 80s and early 90s. And it was then that I realized the profound impact that the original research study had on the female faculty in the school. It was deeply moving, and they all felt seen and heard in a way that they had not previously experienced. The research certainly affects the girls and those who follow, but it also affects the women who see themselves reflected at that age. The research process is a powerful experience for faculty and students alike in girls' schools. Fast forward to today. Dr. Gilligan is revisiting her work with a new study at the Windsor School and the Hewitt School, Strengthening Healthy Resistance and Courage in Girls, aims to raise questions and generate ideas. How are girls experiencing the world today? How can we continue to empower them and strengthen their voices given the issues of today? My experience in girls' school has quite literally always included research studies and working to apply findings from those studies. While we have not taken on any new research projects at my current school, St. Joseph Academy, We do look to research to support our decision-making and strategy. Great girls' schools look to research to guide our practice. What Dr. Gilligan set in motion years ago, we carry forward. And ICGS has also taken up the torch on research and works to give all of us the benefits of great research studies. I feel so lucky to have been connected to this work over time. It is one of the many reasons I love being a girls' school educator. We are in for a treat as Dr. Kara Gilligan speaks with Dr. Sarah Odell and Ms. Denise Libiniak about their current research project. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
So to get us started today, I'm Dr. Sarah Odell from the Hewitt School. Carol is going to share with you the origins of this study, why she ended up doing this work at Laurel, almost, 30 years ago at this point. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing together.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan Murphy. Thank you, Jen Evers. Where's Jen? Thank you all for coming. I imagine, actually, that many of you know how much it means to me to be here with you, the International Coalition of Girls' Schools, to be here in Cleveland, where the Harvard Project on Women's Psychology and Girls' Development did what turned out to be the breakthrough work on girls' voices and women's silences, including our own. And to be introduced by Catherine Purcell, an alumni of the Laurel School Study. I mean, that was fantastic. You actually gave a little bit of my speech, so thank you. And also to be in conversation now with these brilliant teachers and action researchers, Sarah Odell and Denise Libiniak from Windsor, Sarah from Hewitt. I want to begin by honoring girls' schools. And I say that very specifically. I want once again to express my gratitude to the late Bob Parker of Emma Willard, then principal of Emma Willard, and to Leah Reese of the Laurel School, who took the lead when Joseph Adelson, this is the part that Catherine told you, the editor of the 1980 Handbook of Adolescent Psychology, revealed what seems on the face of it incomprehensible. That is, that adolescent girls, and I'm quoting from the handbook, simply had not been much studied. That, quote, the psychology of adolescence was the study of the male youngster writ large. When Adelson cautioned, make no mistake, there is a subtle but pervasive masculine bias running through the psychology of adolescence, manifest in the overemphasis on achievement, independence, and separation, quote, masculine values, and a corresponding neglect of intimacy, nurturance, and love, conceived as, quote, feminine values. It was only girls' schools. I'm very, very moved to say this to you. It was only girls' schools who took in the full implications of this admission. That is, saying in effect, we can't just continue to impose on girls a psychology that was uninformed by their experience and that was distorted also in its representation of boys. Saying in effect that we have to start by listening to girls and see what we can discover about the experience of coming of age by what we can learn from listening to girls. And this turned out to be huge. Basically, what we discovered was that a series of separations between thought and emotion, the mind and the body, the self and relationships, rather than signifying development or progress, were manifestations, in the words of the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, of injury or trauma. Damasio was talking about what happens when we cannot think about what we are feeling, when our minds don't register what we know in our bodies, and as trauma researchers have written about how it's in the aftermath of trauma or the feeling of being overwhelmed that the self becomes divided from relationships. So listening to girls uncovered a major problem in human psychology, having to do with a crisis of connection that is a turning point in development when basic human relational capacities are at risk. For girls, this is when an honest voice, meaning simply the voice that says what I'm feeling and thinking, what I know firsthand on the basis of my experience, when an honest voice comes to sound, and these are all quotes from girls, quote, stupid, quote, rude, quote, mean, quote, unpleasant, or quote, crazy. Or for boys, when an emotionally sensitive and intelligent voice comes to sound, quote, babyish, or girly, or gay. In 1981, with my graduate students, I initiated what became the 10-year Harvard project on women's psychology and girls' development. I don't know if you, speaking as a psychologist, women's psychology was always compared with men's psychology. Are women different from men, or the same as men, and if they're different, who's better, that kind of thing. This was the first time of saying, wait a minute, let's fill in a missing piece of women's history. Let's fill in girls and connect women where we came from. We came from girls. So we spent 10 years listening to girls in a range of school and after-school settings, single-sex, co-ed, public, private, so forth. Here's what I learned. Here's what surprised me. That's interesting that it surprised me. The frank and fearless voices of young girls. I mean, how come that was a surprise? People often speak of girls finding their voices. In fact, girls have their voices. Which, no, that's right. I mean, just listen. I mean, I remember we were having a discussion one day about, is it ever good to tell a lie? And a girl said, my house is wallpapered with lies. People say, we want girls to have their voices, and I say, really? You really want to hear what she sees? You really want her to tell you what she's seeing and what she knows? That's what I'm talking about. Which then can become a problem in a culture where it's necessary not to know what girls and women know. Girls' outspokenness, their confidence, their clarity, and their courage can be startling. Here's Diana, a second grader, from Meeting at the Crossroads, the book that Catherine mentioned. Lynn Michael Brown in my 1992 book reporting the findings of the Laurel School study. Diana says she feels bad because her brother and sister, Diana's a second grader, keep stealing her mother's attention at dinner, interrupting her when she tries to speak. The interviewer asks her, what did you do? Diana says that one night she brought a whistle to dinner. And when she was interrupted, she blew the whistle. Mother, brother, and sister, she says, abruptly stopped talking and turned to her, at which point she said, quote, in a normal voice, end quote, that's much nicer. Here's a first grader I interviewed this spring. She says, I have wonderful friends, but she tells me she also has a frenemy. Now, the frenemy, quote, poured sand in my eye in kindergarten, and in first grade, she made her whole class act like her, which I don't really like how she acts. She's like the owner of this class. Everyone follows my rules. Asked if she did anything, this first grader said, I just said, we need to use the power of ignore. These little girls are very clear about what's happening in their relational world. They recognize what one can think of as relational crimes and misdemeanors, stealing someone's attention, acting as though one is the owner of others, and they're confident in their ability or their power to do something about it, In Crossroads, Lynn Michael Brown and I call these young girls whistleblowers in the relational world, and you know what happens to whistleblowers. From girls, I learned that I don't know can become a cover for I know. At critical points in development, a human voice can go undercover and be covered by a voice that sounds more mature, more developed, seemingly has more authority, and the voice of what I know recedes into silence. Here's an I poem. That's part of our method, composed by listening to the I voice, that is the first person voice, here of a 7th grader, listening to her I statements and following how her I moves across the terrain of this interview narrative. And this is taking all the I statements from the interview. What did I do? I was confused. I said I didn't know. What did I say? I didn't, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I forgot, I tried, I see, I did, I don't care. I apologized, I spoke, I can, I don't really care. I said I don't. And then a you voice comes in and speaks to this I, voices that she is taking in, telling her, quote, you've got to take the good with the bad. You can't always fight battles. You've got to pick which battles you want to fight. And then here is the I responding, trying and then not caring. I'm trying, I mean, I don't. I honestly don't care. I don't really care. What she's telling us is that she has learned to not know and to not really care, learned to dissociate herself from what she knows and what she really cares about. From listening to girls, I learned to question the cover voice. Is that true, I would ask? Do you believe that? Do you really feel that way? And then, to listen, I started to notice that if I listened for the words actually, or the word really, or the phrase to be honest, or the word honestly, a girl would tell me what she really thought, how she actually felt, or what she would say if she were to be quite honest. Do you want to know what I think, or do you want to know what I really think? Do you want to hear my initiated voice, the voice of what I have learned to think, or do you want to hear my voice, what I really think? Iris, the valedictorian of her high school class, admitted to the highly competitive college that was her first choice, says, quote, if I were to say what I was feeling and thinking, no one would want to be with me. My voice would be too loud. And then she adds, but you have to have relationships. Again this year, I found myself saying to several girls who said essentially the same thing that Iris had said, if you're not saying what you're feeling and thinking, then where are you in these relationships? And again, once again, it was clear to me that the girls saw the problem they were facing. Paradoxically, they were giving up on relationship in order to have, quote, relationships. And to me, this is a key challenge of girls' education, because in essence, girls are being offered a bad bargain, a choice between having a voice and having relationships, a bargain that they need the strength to resist and the courage to break. And here, schools can really make a difference, as we hear over and over again from girls in our interviews. And I would say, and here, I think is where girls' schools can take the lead. So from listening to girls, I learned that I needed a new theory, one that does not confuse initiation with development. I learned that I needed to look at all aspects of development through the lens of resistance and accommodation. That is, as a healthy body resists infection, a healthy psyche resists what Ani Rogers and Niobe Way in their recent article in Perspectives on Child Development have called the macro ideologies that compromise our ability to survive and to thrive, and among which they name racism and patriarchy. And I needed a method of radical listening, meaning a way of listening that gets to the root of what is being said and also what is not being said, the conversation under the conversation. Radical also in that it is a way of listening that holds a potential for transformation. As I say to my students, notice what happens when you replace judgment with curiosity. 2 girls interviewed this year when asked if they could change one thing about the world, said that what they would change are people's judgments. That is, the readiness of people to judge others. And listening to girls, what struck me was how heavily judgments fall on girls at the time when they come of age. So that very briefly is the history. And the next question is, why pick it up now? Sarah, Denise is going to start.
Everybody can hear me all right? Right? This mic is fun. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I feel like I could just keep listening all day to you talk about that. So my name is Denise Labiniak. I am a teacher at the Windsor School. I also have a role there called the institutional researcher. So I was thinking a lot about what I wanted to say about why getting involved in this work right now. It was actually a year ago at ICGS when Sarah Odell and I, we had been collaborating virtually for quite a while, but we met for the first time in person, and that's really where the start of the work with Carol and our schools began. So I was thinking, what do I really want to say about what is motivating me to try, and our school to try to engage in this project right now, and why I think it's so important. So I came to Windsor a long time ago. I actually was in grad school and wanted to teach, and left graduate school. I teach physics, I don't know if I said that. And in 1995, I came to Windsor to teach. Windsor is a 5th to 12th grade academically challenging girls' school in Boston. We're a day school. So 1995 was a long time ago, and I've been at the same school the whole time, the whole part of my career, doing different things and having different roles. But I've really had a very interesting vantage point of spending my entire career at the same place. I think that I calculated, I think I've seen, we're a small school, we're just under 470 students about, and I've seen, I think, 1,800 students graduate from the school over that time, which feels like a lot in the context of the size of our school. I guess, having been at Windsor for a long time is limiting. I don't have a lot of perspective. I haven't taught at 3 or 4 schools. I don't know what other schools are like. But I also think that provides an advantage in the sense that I'm able to be in the same context and observe change over time as new students come, as new faculty come, as our school continues to reevaluate and rethink its approaches to working with girls. And I get the joy and the pleasure of working with these girls over time and watching them go off into the world when they graduate, competent and confident, and following up on them after they graduate. So I feel like I've seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of good things over that time. I've seen some things that I know personally in my career I've been working for, like seeing increased student involvement in STEM and seeing more kids taking a subject that I teach, physics, which doesn't have a lot of women in it, and that's great. And I have seen more students become involved in the decision-making in the school. I've seen the students having more sophisticated and honest conversations about race and about privilege and about the privilege of being at a school like Windsor with the resources that we have and the opportunities that the students have there. I've also seen over time student stress levels rising. I've seen some increasing exasperation and frustration with the world and the way it is and the way adults conduct themselves with one another. I've seen increased worry among the students, I've seen increased sadness, and I've seen increased perfectionism, despite our best efforts to mitigate that and work with students around that. And then I think it was recently, I don't know, I'm sure many of you saw the CDC there was a study from the CDC that from 2011, I think it was the Youth Risk Behavior Survey from 2011 to 2021, increased extreme sadness, hope, and hopelessness among girls went from 36% of the girls in 2011 experiencing that to 57% of the girls showing signs of extreme sadness and hopelessness. And that was a steady increase, and then in 2017, a jump up, and I don't know what the data is right now since 2021. And it was increasing for boys too, but there's always been this gender gap around in that study since the data from 2011, and it's been increasing. So, I think about it like this. There's so much good happening in our schools where we are working with the girls in our schools and trying to make sure and ensure that they're able to retain the voice that Carol talked about and go off into the world and feel confident and be able to do the things that they want to do. But that's also mixed up with this other stuff, and I feel like it's a little bit like cream in the coffee. Like you put the cream in the coffee, you can't take the cream out of the coffee. It's all blended together, all the joys and successes. And I think what that does is it makes it a really hard distillation experiment to go in and try to extract out what are the things that are causing these negative symptoms that girls are seeing. And it also makes it easy to not do that because it's all mixed up, and so you see all the good along with all the stuff that you're worried about. And so what's important for me about getting involved in this study is that I just think in the political climate we're in, where there's a lot happening, it's contentious. We're having some complicated and necessary conversations about race, where there's a complicated and expanding and exciting understanding about gender happening, and all of these, we're in that water right now with the students, and I want to understand what is going on for them at this time. Over the last few years, I have noticed that myself and my colleagues, myself especially, I think this is mostly me, but other people too, respond with a de-escalation approach to a lot of the stuff. The kids come and they say things, and I try really hard to wrap up their feelings in my logic and diffuse the situation. And when I first came to Windsor, I had read, the faculty I think had read Crossroads right before I got there, and then I had read it after that. Then I hadn't gone back to it until, after we started working on this project, and it reminded me of something that you wrote, that it's so important to engage with these conflicts with these girls in a relational way and to really hear what they're saying, and to not engage with it at an ideological level where we're sort of talking about this and that in this abstract sense and not having a conversation with the students. For us and for me, what I see is it's come up a lot around academics and the stress and pressure and the desire of our students to achieve their goals, which is good. We want our students to achieve their goals, right? We want them to be driven, we want them to be motivated, and we want them to get to where they want to be. But I've also started to see a little bit what they're giving up on the way to trying to achieve those goals, and I'm starting to feel more concerned about it. And I think at some schools, a desire for success can sometimes create a culture of self-sacrifice in the school, of what the students are willing to give up in order to try to achieve their goals. And I think we really have to stop and ask what's going on with that. So when we started the Action Research Project that we're doing, Sarah Odell at Hewitt started an action research group that Windsor is a part of. That's the question our students wanted to explore, and that we worked with them all year on that very question of what are they potentially giving up in order to achieve their goals. So I think just to sum it up, I feel at this point that there really isn't a choice for me personally and for schools to engage in this work by having direct conversations with girls. I think with Carol and Sarah and the methods and Carol's way of talking to these girls, talking to our girls and us in a relational way, it's a new way to have this conversation about, it's a new way to have this conversation. So thank you.
I want to start by saying the world needs our schools, and I really believe that. I work in girls' schools. I work at the Hewitt School. I previously worked at Miss Porter's school. I've seen some of my colleagues here from Miss Porter's. The world needs girls' schools to lead this work. And I feel that the sort of moment is now. And I want to give us a little context to the broader conversations about education. I just graduated with my doctorate last year from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I apologize to all the Ohio State fans in the room. But one of the things I was so struck by at Wisconsin when I arrived is I had said to my advisor, who was sort of a famous academic within the space of social justice leadership, I said, I'm really interested in what I observed at Miss Porter's school. I said girls had a freedom there to be themselves that I did not see at the co-ed school where I had taught, and I did not see at the co-ed school I had attended. And she looked at me, this was about 2 months into my doctoral program, and she said, you will have no career if you study girls. And I said, what? And Colleen went on to tell me that as education looks at the broad landscape, boys are seen as the cohort that needs the most attention and the most intervention, that schools, K-12 schools, are failing boys. And that because of schools like Windsor and Hewitt and Miss Porter's school and many of your schools out there with their wonderful college lists, with their girls in the video who speak very openly, many of whom have that educated, honest voice that Carol talked about, they don't see the necessity of studying girls. They think our cohort is doing okay. And what the CDC study, I think, has pointed out is that they may look like they're doing okay by the metrics of education research. They're graduating, they have good grades, they're going on to college, but they're not all right. And the other piece that I always point to, which I don't know if any of you follow Richard Reeves. Denise has heard many of my rants whenever he posts something annoying. Whenever he posts something incendiary, I should say, on Twitter. He authored the book of Boys and Men that's getting a lot of attention right now. We actually did it as a faculty read at Hewitt because I believe you should know what the opposition is saying. And what I always feel when I hear people like Reeves, he says repeatedly it's not a zero-sum game. I agree. Children need better education. We need to all do better. But if girls are doing so well academically, why do we continue to be underrepresented in all policy-making decisions, in Fortune 500 CEO positions? Even in our own field, my dissertation research ended up being on how gender identity impacts aspiring K-12 leaders and their journeys. In our own field, 80% of K-12 teachers are women. Only 30% of superintendents in the United States are women. We are not only in a feminized profession, but we are in a sex-segregated profession, which means that men hold most of the power within our feminized profession. And so yes, girls have made advances, absolutely. Although I do joke often that when you start with nothing, it does look like a lot more of an advance. Girls have made advances and they do really well in school, but we're not seeing that happen in terms of who has the power. And so what I think why Carol's work, it's so necessary to return to this study, is that honest voice that she's talking about, which we see in our lower school students at Hewitt. I actually observed a kindergarten class this year, and it's that moment, that lull, right, particularly in an elementary class, where you can tell the kids are really into the work, but you're about to lose them. You know what I'm talking about? And the class kind of got quiet, and one of these kindergartners stood up in the middle of the class, and she said, "I am so bored." And that's one of those moments, right? That's not a nice voice, necessarily, by the teacher's standards, right? But how do I, as an educator, preserve that voice? One of the things I was struck by, Carol may mention later, and I know she often talks about Darnella Frazier, who videotaped the murder of George Floyd, and Greta Thunberg, and these young women who are speaking out about the greatest social injustices of our world. I was also keyed into, if you remember back to the January 6th hearings, it was young women in the White House who have spoken out about what happened, about what was wrong. Our schools need to become sites of resistance, which I know some of you now just leaned back in your chair and said, who is this crazy person that they have invited to speak at ICGS? But what I mean by that is the resistance that Carol talks about. That resistance to say the nice thing so that everyone feels okay. And the bad bargain Carol is talking about is that if that happens in many of our schools, where does it get you? It gets you a good grade. Gets you admission to the Ivy League school, gets you the job that you want. But I want us to think about, is it that moment where they're making that choice that is precluding them from entering the halls of power where you have to use not a nice voice? And so that is my challenge to all of you, which I know you all care deeply about educating girls, you care about the women that they go on to become. But we have to engage in this difficult work, and we have to do it now. And so, Carol, why did you reopen the study?
Because you asked me.
It's true.
It wouldn't have occurred. No, because you asked me, and because I was genuinely curious. But I have to tell you, I mean, Meeting at the Crossroads, of all the books that I've assigned this past fall to my women graduate students at NYU, that is PhD students and law students, the book that had the biggest impact on these women was Meeting at the Crossroads. I'm just going to give you one quote from one of them. Just what she says is, as what she wrote in her weekly reflection paper, when we teach people not to use their voices openly and authentically, and listen to this image, we sow a veil of doubt. We sow a veil of doubt over everything they know, which stifles their willingness to speak and confront conflict. And, you know, in some ways, what I think right now, and why I think I'm thrilled to be back in collaboration with girls' schools, with Hewitt and Windsor, and also our third collaborator in school is Young Women's Leadership School of East Harlem, with coming back to listening to girls again, to try to learn from girls at a time when it seems to me that girls' schools can again take the lead in initiating what I see as an absolutely crucial conversation to talk about. This is always what interests me, to talk about what's not being talked about. So let me just talk very brief. First of all, let me tell you, Meeting at the Crossroads, what Girls Exposed is where people were talking about separation. What girls were revealing is what was really going on was a crisis of connection. If I say what I'm really feeling and thinking, no one will want to be with me. And if I don't say what I'm feeling and thinking, no one will be with me. And the girls would look at women, at us, and say, do you know what I'm talking about? And there was a kind of deal between girls and women, which is because we were all making our way in, can I use this word, this patriarchal world? Do you use that word in girls' schools? I mean, and so it was like, if you don't say what you see me doing, I won't say what I see you doing. So there was a kind of collusion of, we're just not going to talk about it. And I'll just give you, I mean, I'm not talking about some abstract thing. It's like a 7th grade teacher was really upset because her daughter, her 11-year-old, came to her and said, Mom, I'm so angry at you because when you and Daddy argue, you always give in. I mean, this is that same thing as the little girls that's stealing the attention. It's reading the relational world. And the teacher said, I was so humiliated, I was so ashamed that her daughter was seeing this. And then it was a wonderful story. This is a Laurel School story. So the teacher's a co-homeroom teacher, 7th grade, and with a very charismatic male teacher. And one day he says, there's a new rule. No one can leave lunch till everyone's finished. She said, come on, you can predict this now. I didn't say anything. I relate to him the way I relate to my husband. But she has the voice of her daughter in her head now. So she goes to lunch, And some girls come late from orchestra. And she looks at the others and she says, "You may be excused." And the girls get up and they start to leave lunch, and one of them turns to her and says, "Good for you, Mrs. Miller. We're proud of you." So what I'm trying to say is, whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, this is being read every day, all the time. And I think it's girls' schools that are to take the lead in, is it possible to allow girls to know what they know, to see what they see, to trust their experience, to start this conversation. What I want to tell you is the phrase crisis of connection is now used to describe all the boys' research. It's used by the director of this beautiful film, Close, that was a finalist for the Oscar about boys' friendships and the crisis of connection. And Meeting at the Crossroads is out of print. In other words, it's been forgotten that this entire conversation began by listening to girls. So, I mean, why come back to this work now? It's not only what Denise said about the CDC. The Girls Index, do you know about that? 10,000, survey of 10,000 American teenage girls. Question, do you say what you really think? Do you not say what you really think? And do you not disagree when in fact you disagree because you want people to like you? And I think Sarah said it, you know, having people like you, your teacher likes you, you get a good recommendation and so forth, so it's not for nothing. 46% of teenage girls say that's what they do. They don't say what they really think, they don't disagree when they disagree because they want people to like them. Now, let's just take girls who have a 4.0 or above grade average. Want to predict? What happens? It goes up to 62%. Now, these are the girls who, by common standards, are the most successful educationally. You could say they have the most to lose. They have the most opportunities. And so there's the most, in a sense, incentive for them not to say. So if we're putting into the world girls who are not saying what they're feeling and thinking, then the fact that suddenly you have women in all these positions doesn't really make much of a difference. I want to end by saying I have a new book coming out in September. It's called In a Human Voice. It's my reflection on my work in a different voice. And the gist of it is this. The different voice, which was heard as, quote, feminine, is in fact a human voice. It's the voice of care ethics. The voice of care ethics is a human voice. It's all of our voice. The voice it differs from is a patriarchal voice. Not a masculine voice, a patriarchal voice bound to gender binaries and hierarchies, where achievement is masculine and love is feminine, that kind of stuff. And where patriarchy is in force or enforced, the human voice is a voice of resistance. And care ethics is an ethics of liberation because it frees democracy, which is based on equal voice. You know, if you don't have equal voice, you can't solve conflicts in relationship. You solve conflicts through the use of force. It frees democracy from patriarchy. So in a culture, which is ours, where care and caring is not only gendered feminine, but largely care work is done by women, and often women of color, this is a voice that's absolutely needed at a time when the costs of carelessness and indifference are huge. I mean, it really threatens the future, that there would even be a future, the girls that are concerned. So I look at why girls' schools and why now? Why revisit this work now? I really think this is the moment for girls' schools to take the lead in initiating a conversation that's not just about girls and women, that's about human psychology and about education. So now we're going to turn to you.
Yeah, so just looking at the time right now, we wanted to at least have you all have the opportunity to ask Carol or Denise and I any questions. I'm hoping we have time at least for one or two. And I think there is a mic going around.
I see.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the really, really thought-provoking sort of presentation here. You began to touch on this a bit at the end, but I'm curious, as our schools and as the world sort of embraces an evolving notion of gender and gender identities, how will that be reflected in the research that you're doing moving forward? I imagine that will create a different level of nuance, and if you could even speak to sort of preliminarily what you're seeing in that area.
Why don't you start with that? I do want to respond to it, yeah.
One of the things I would encourage everyone in the room to do is to go back and read the author's note that Carol put into In a Different Voice in 1992. And she actually addresses this, and I'm always interested in this question because I feel the power of Carol's work and particularly her research methods, which if you're looking for a session during session B, Denise and I will be talking about Carol's research methods. Carol always left open the possibility of a much more diverse notion of gender. Her work and the idea of listening to marginalized voices exactly lends itself to hearing from trans and gender nonconforming students. And that's what I found in my dissertation work using the listening guide. I interviewed a gender nonconforming school leader. This work is automatically open to it. And my personal belief, and I think we talk about this a lot at Hewitt, is that part of being a feminist organization is being a liberatory one and accepting students who are trans and gender nonconforming and making them welcome in our school. We don't feel that's antithetical to being a girls' school or talking about girls. And I was trained by 2 transgender professors at the University of Wisconsin in the Gender and Women's Studies department. And what they would always say, they were fascinated by these conversations in the ed school, is they said, the revolution is not coming when we're arguing about pronouns. That's not the real issue. And you all have girls in your schools who identify as girls but don't identify with the way we define girlhood, right? And so I would challenge all of us to think about what does it mean to have an inclusive space and to really hear our students. And the truth is you're not going to hear one voice. Carol did not hear one voice and in a different voice. She didn't hear it in the Laurel study and meeting at the Crossroads. It's always been there. We just have to be open to it. So that's what I would say, Carol.
No, I love what you said. I think it's great. It's really about voice. I mean, it's really, and I think that, I mean, my own experience is that, well, first of all, there's really been a paradigm shift in the human sciences toward a much more relational way of looking at things. And, I mean, you know, patriarchy is not natural. Sarah Blaffer Hrdy, in her book, she's an evolutionary anthropologist, she has this quote, patriarchal ideologies that foster the chastity of women and the perpetuation and augmentation of male lineages undercut the evolutionary priority of putting children's well-being first. So if we talk about patriarchy, it's not a natural kind of this privileging of the voice of fathers as the voice of morality and law, privileging some people's voices over others. But it depends for its continuation on male violence or the threat of male violence to hold the hierarchy of male privilege and power in place, and on women's silence to keep its secrets. So I think that something that seems, you know, I love my girls' work because it sounds so vanilla. I'm in favor of strengthening girls' healthy resistance and courage. Who's against this? You know, that girls have voices and you educate girls' voices and you teach girls, you help girls learn how you can both have a voice and stay in relationship and so forth. And it's all, you know, it makes total sense until you realize you're threatening the structure of patriarchy. And then I was surprised by, I was doing work on girls, and suddenly I was accused of starting a war against boys. it's like you study girls for a nanosecond, and it's like, could we please go back to studying boys again? So you have to think about what is really involved in educating girls, and I think that's why I think your girls' schools. So for you, this is a key question. At this time, when, as I said, the costs of not caring, of carelessness and indifference in the human world are just huge. So if in the culture we live in, caring is gendered feminine, and women of color is often do the lion's share of care work, that means we know something about what it means to care. It means paying attention, it means listening, it means so forth. And so you want those voices. That's the voice you want. And what I see right now, because what Denise was talking about, this is in our interviews now, girls are preoccupied with, quote, success, because they're told it's not an issue anymore. You can be successful. But the question is, is the price of success not saying what they really feel and think, or what they know firsthand on the basis of their experience? So these issues are surprisingly alive and very vital.
Jen, do we have time for at least one more question?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, that was a great question though to end on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, what a powerful conversation. And just as you exit, I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Gilligan, for your insightful perspective. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And Sarah and Denise, thank you very, very much for your comments and for facilitating such a great session. Appreciate it.